Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Com 372. I am now in the second of the asynchronous lectures about nonlinear video editing, what it is, how it works. And one of the most important distinctions to think about nonlinear digital video editing is that it's retained a lot of the backbone, the spine, the central nervous system, the DNA of feature film editing from previous professional eras. And so we see that in the very first vocabulary term that we're going to talk about in these lectures, and that is clip. So we talk about clip in terms of a piece of digital media, whether that's an audio clip, say a piece of synchronized sound from a person who you've done an interview with, or a clip of music, or a clip of video, graphic, a built sequence that you're dropping into your timeline. And the word clip itself is an old analog film term. And so if you can imagine with me, you know, filmmaking, 1940s, the editor who's working on the film Casablanca, right? That editor was given a piece of developed film stock, a daily, that had been shot, was reviewed by the director, maybe the studio head, maybe some of the actors watched the dailies, but they're the individual takes of all of the shots. So the wide shot, the tights of Humphrey Bogart, the tights of Ingrid Bergman, maybe a two shot of the two of them, all on different cans of films or different rolls. And those are the dailies. And then what an editor would do is an editor would watch those film clips on a Steenbeck, which was a machine that would project light into a small monitor. So you could watch on the Steenbeck the clip itself on a small monitor on this very large table that had an outtake reel on one side and an uptake reel on the other. And the film would roll through past the shutter, and it would be as if you were screening a movie in a movie theater, but for yourself on the Steenbeck on that little tiny monitor. These machines still exist. So for example, if you're a researcher and you go to the Library of Congress and you want to watch an old kinescope from a television show from the 1950s, it doesn't exist anywhere else except on 16 millimeter film, which was shot from the television broadcast. So something like The Honeymooners or a 1950s news report or another sitcom in the 1950s or Playhouse 90, all this great stuff that was done in the 1950s for live television only exists in 16 millimeter film, and it's typically watched by researchers on this same machine that I'm talking about from olden days, right? And so you as a researcher, you get your card, you go to the Library of Congress, you order a Playhouse 90 from 1950, and you watch that on this machine, one roll of film on this side, rolling past the shutter and light for the Steenbeck onto the screen, which is a projected screen. Might even actually be rear projected if I'm remembering correctly. But it's a small screen. And then to the uptake reel. And then when you're done with that, you have to rewind it back onto the original reel, an analog film thing. So anyway, so this Steenbeck, this editor, artist that was working on these old analog films would have to take a piece of film stock, say a 1.5 second clip of Humphrey Bogart, you know, looking longingly at Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca. And that editor would decide, okay, this shot is perfect from this frame all the way, you know, maybe 24 frames a second, maybe 48 frames later to here. That piece of film strip that's now 48 shots long, they took a pair of scissors, they cut or clipped the top, they cut or clipped the bottom, and that piece of analog film was hung somewhere from the ceiling, and that became a film clip. And that's why we use that name today. So that's just an example to show you how the analog era is still a huge part of what we do, why we do, and how we do it. So we call it a clip because that's how film used to be made, one clip at a time. And then using the Steam Deck, watching the material, an editor would take the individual pieces of film and tape them together. And that piece of taped together film would be the movie that was then printed onto other pieces of film for distribution. So pretty fascinating way that that old workflow is still connected into our current workflow. And so you guys know all about video editing software. I have some examples here in this slideshow that I'm going to show you. And you know, I think it's interesting because there's so much great software that's available absolutely for free. And so some of you may have gotten a real start on iMovie, on Movie Maker, on the PCs, on an easier to use app that does video clips. Premiere Pro is, as I said in the last lecture, is for a professional workflow. And so it really does serve you well to learn it now while you're in school. So for almost every instance, and certainly in this class, it's exclusively what you'll use. But for almost every instance in the other classes, I'd like you to use Premiere Pro because it just offers so many more tools. Say, for example, you've got the shot that I have now, which I forgot to turn on my ring light, and say you need to fix that. Premiere Pro offers so many. Let's see if I can get my ring light on. Premiere Pro offers so many tools where you can fix that problem. You could change the contrast, you know, all those things that you can do in Photoshop, you can do in Premiere Pro as well. And you just can't do that in so many of the other lower end software packages, iMovie. A lot of the others just won't let you control those little things. So you could change the midtones on my face to bring up that darker shot before I turn the lights on correctly, and it won't affect the shadows on those books back there, and it won't affect the really intense highlights of those lights over my shoulder, but it will change those midtones in my face. And that's what is so great about Premiere Pro, these little things that you can do to hide mistakes, to create really polished media. And so, as I said, it's my hope that you use it on every project while you're in the department, every video project, but also that you certainly are required to use it in this course. It's the only software package. And you'll remember that I said that the school pays for your license through the fees that you pay, your student fees. And so you really do need to register for that license, download the CC Cloud app, and make sure that you are using all of those tools. Okay, so just some of the other software options, and I've talked a little bit about this already, but Final Cut Pro used to be top dog. Avid and Pinnacle Avid was exclusively Avid machines. You couldn't use it on either a Mac or a PC. You had to have the Avid software package. They built the whole room. And so one of the reasons you still see Avid used is it was so expensive to buy that many big networks, NBC News, ABC News, that bought, you know, room after room of Avid edit suites and paid this massive license fee and bought all this gear from Avid. They want to get their money back, and so they kept using it even after Premiere Pro came around, that was both better and way less expensive. And so you still see Avid jobs in high-end professional media because the Avid editors have been trained, they know their stuff, they know that keyboard, they know the shortcuts. They don't want to have to learn a new software package. Now, this is an advantage for you guys in that you're learning the state-of-the-art software now. And so you go into the job market not being burdened with the Avid workflow, the Avid experience, because it's 20 years old at this point, right? It's still, I mean, it's great software, but it's still, it's old, and it's not this current tool. Now, I used a version of it, Pinnacle, on my student films, you know, back years ago when I was a PhD student at Maryland, and I really liked it. It was cheap. It worked really well. I did a number of student movies on that, but when Maryland bought the Adobe licenses for all of us, I switched over. iMovie, everybody knows it. If you have a Mac, it's pre-installed, works really well, and it's getting better. Like, I've been seeing a lot of iMovie projects and other courses, And it is pretty good software. It just doesn't do all of the high-end stuff. It doesn't have this massive toolbox that Adobe does with Premiere. Windows Movie Maker is something you guys can use in another class, not this one. Sony has had a long history of really great technological innovations. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the Sony Betacam was the industry standard camera for decades, and now in the DSLR era, that has totally changed. But it's interesting that the mirrorless SLR, Sony has made a huge comeback. So it's now my favorite camera. The Sony mirrorless Alpha 7, Alpha 9 series, I think is just a phenomenal camera. Not super expensive, way less expensive than the old Sony Betacams and Digibetas used to be, but better image, right? So we've gotten way better technology, significantly cheaper, so that a student can now afford to buy one of these cameras. Whereas, you know, when I was first in graduate school, a Sony Digibeta camera, state-of-the-art documentary news camera, would have been $80,000, $100,000 back then, right? And now you can get a Sony Alpha 7, Alpha 9 with a single lens, you know, $2,000, $2,500. A lot of money still. Arguably, is it worth spending that when you can get a 4K camera here on your telephone? Is it worth spending $2,500? Maybe not, right? Maybe it's not worth it, even at that low price point. But from $100,000 to $2,500 is a huge price break when you're looking at high-end digital production. And so it may be that Sony's got an editing system in the works that's going to supplant Adobe, Final Cut, Adobe Premiere Pro. Who knows? Who's to say if someday we aren't talking about this next thing, whatever it is around the corner. Okay, Edius software is out there. It's made by the company that does Grass Valley switchers, which are the giant boards that you see in production studios. So when you see someone who's switching cameras on like an NFL broadcast, they're using a Grass Valley switcher. And so they came up with Edius. It's really good news editing software, really good, except that it doesn't have all the tools. Again, it's just meant for the news person that's got a quick package to get to air. They don't want to have to spend days and weeks and months tweaking it. They're not a filmmaker. They're doing quick news. And this software has all those tools that are just right there on the surface, easy to use. Some audio fixes, some color correction, but not nearly the giant toolbox that I had mentioned for Premiere Pro. Okay, so let's look at the Adobe Timeline. I'm going to end this lecture by talking about this timeline here, and then I'll move on to another lecture. But I do want to introduce this interface to you as we start. So let's see if I can get my mouse to show up on the screen share. And there it is. So the Adobe software, when you look at it for the first time, can be completely intimidating. Completely intimidating. But if you understand the workflow, it's a lot less difficult to see what it is that you're looking at. This is a slightly older version of the interface, but it works for this lecture because it's basically the same thing. The difference is the new version of the interface has, in this area here, a number of different presets that you can move to. The learning preset, the editing preset, the audio, the graphics preset, and they're awesome. And so I will talk with you about those in a later lecture. But for now, I just want to talk about this basic interface. And I want to introduce the letter N as a sort of guidepost for the workflow here. You're going to start in this box, and you're going to move up, and then down and across, and then up. And that letter N is the workflow through this, this software. And you can also think of it as a series of vectors, say an up vector, and then a diagonal and a cross vector, and then another up vector. And if you did that, and this last vector were moving up this way, you could think of this last vector as where your project goes out of the software to become a movie. So at this point, it's not a film. It is an Adobe Premiere Pro project. And you can't screen this at a movie theater. So you've got to render it, and you've got to export it, and then you take that file, and that's your movie. So the 4 vectors up, across, and back up, and out to a movie is the workflow that you need to understand for Adobe Premiere Pro. So I'm gonna end this lecture now, and in the next lecture, take a break, have a coffee, come back. I will talk about all of these different boxes and what each of these different boxes does. So that is the second introductory lecture to video editing, and I will see you either in class or in the next asynchronous lecture. And until then, stay well.